Welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Every Friday night, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, and simulcast on cjmarsradio.com and 365 Live. Also, we're on shoutcast.com. Then throughout the week, these shows are replayed on awakeradio.us, Hazy Radio, firehorseradio.com, and all these different stations. Starting Thursdays of next week, Thursday, we're going to be on Shake and Wake with Rick and Annie. Every Thursday night, we're going to be doing a live show. Tonight, we got a really big show. To quote my hero, Ed Sullivan, we have Steve Wick, who's the author of a book called Bad Company, Drugs, Hollywood, and the Cotton Club Murder. And this is one of those stories, guys, that I want you to really tune in because this is one of those shows that when I wanted to do a radio show, this is one of those stories that I wanted to get out there. So this is one of those big shows that I'm doing. Let's see. You can find the Opperman Report on YouTube channel. You can find us on Spreaker and soon to be iHeartRadio. Now, if you missed last week's show we had Jackie Hollander, and she did the whole story about James Brown and Al Sharpton and all that stuff. That was a really great show. If you missed it, go down and check that one out and try and find it. Okay, next week coming up, we got Heart Attack. Hart Fisher is the name of the guest, Hart Fisher. His radio show is called The Heart Attack. And we're also going to have our producer, Keith Davis, on, who has a lot of interesting stories. And he's going to be coming on with Hart Fisher. And they're going to be swapping some stories back and forth about what goes on in Portland and stuff like that. Then after that, we have a national hero. We have Alan A. Bell. That big famous hoaxer from the 70s and the 80s. He used to do all those big hoax on the news stations back in New York and put on all these stunts. The guy's like 90 years old by now, but we got him. And he's going to be coming on and telling us, sharing a lot of stories with us. We hope to have with him that night Justin Tribble, who's more of a current-day hoaxer. He did that Joel Osteen hoax and also the Dr. Bill Weld hoax of just recent. Then we have John Poston about Tupac, the Tupac murder, and COINTELPRO and all the stuff that went on with Tupac. So we got a whole bunch of really big shows coming up, and a couple I'm probably forgetting. But tonight, we have the author of Bad Company, Drugs, Hollywood, and the Cotton Club Murder. You can go to my blog, The Opperman Report, and there's a link there to pick up that book on Amazon. We have Steve Wick. Steve, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, thank you, Steve. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Of course.
Can you tell the audience about yourself? I read about how you shared in these Pulitzer Prizes. You're a journalist over there at Newsday. Tell us about yourself.
Yes, I'm a journalist at Newsday. I've been here for many, many years. I was a journalist in Colorado as well, and then I came here soon after a very celebrated murder story in Phoenix, Arizona, which I helped cover. And the corruption around it. And then I came to New York to work for Newsday. And I've done many, many things here and written a few books. And the first book was Bad Company. And I had met the murder victim, Roy Radin, a couple of times in a couple of celebrated court cases here. And then was struck when he went out to L.A. And the next thing I heard, his body was found.
Yeah, well, why don't we get into that? Because he did have a really colorful history back in New York. So why don't you tell how you met him and stuff like that?
He had a kind of questionable business practice where he would get old-time vaudeville performers like Georgie Jessel and people who hadn't been on any shows or done anything in a long, long time, and he would get them for next to nothing. And he would send them around the country to little farm towns and mountain towns and coal towns, and they'd perform in VFW halls and high school auditoriums. And Roy Radin, claimed that he was doing all this to raise money for different, mostly police charities. And he got in trouble with the Attorney General in the state of New York when it turns out that wasn't exactly true. And so I knew him from that case, but there was also another celebrated case where he invited some women from New York City out to his oceanfront mansion, which he called Ocean Castle in Southampton on Dune Road. And a lot of bad things happened to one of the women there. she ended up being kind of put on a train back to New York, and the police showed up, and he was charged with various offenses with that, and drugs were found in the house. He got through that and decided that he would leave New York behind. And so Roy
before you get to that, it's kind of interesting that the young woman in that story was Melanie Holler, who was one of the sweat hogs. She was the first female sweat hog on Welcome Back, Kotter.
I'm not quite sure how well she was doing at the time that he got her out to his house in Southampton. She probably thought she was meeting a big-time producer, and of course, all she was meeting was someone who could put old-time acts into VFW halls in West Virginia. But he had a lot of money, not exactly well earned or honestly earned, but she probably thought that something good was going to come of this, and all she got was an intense amount of bad publicity, as did he.
Yeah, let's get into the whole Roy Radin back in Long Island there in the Hamptons, because now that was a 70-room mansion. It
was a huge house. I was in it a couple of times. It was an ugly house, to say the least. It was just this giant thing with a turret over it, overlooking the beach and the ocean, in a part of eastern Long Island on the South Shore where there's just a ton of money. But this one really stood out. I mean, it was so gaudy, so over the top. And Roy would be seen in Southampton Village being squired around by limousine drivers and private cars. And he had a reputation for hiring a lot of off-duty cops to work for him. That was extremely controversial, particularly after, he got into trouble with the law. He had all these cops working for him on the side. So he was a presence. He was a character. He was an odd bird in an odd place, but he really stood out, as odd as he was.
Yeah, because he used to wear like a big magician's cape and carry around this cane with a silver handle on it.
Yeah, he had all that stuff.
Yeah.
I didn't know it until well after the murder, and I was researching the book. He had a relationship to a very mobbed up guy who was kind of his protector in the city, a Genovese family guy who got him out of a few scrapes, particularly when he took a show to Atlantic City that had like Joey Bishop and people like that in it. And Roy was just a mysterious, odd bird.
Yeah.
And he made a lot of money, and he kept a lot of money, and he got into lots of trouble, and he got out of lots of trouble. And at some point after the Melanie Haller incident, he kind of put it all aside and moved to Los Angeles.
Did he actually move to Los Angeles? Because he always had that house there on Long Island.
He kept the house. It was later, of course, sold after the murder, but he believed that he was going to start over in L.A., and he was going to start a whole new life. And he would keep a place in the city out here,
right?
And he'd keep his mansion, but it was all fake. I mean, it was a theater. It was a movie set. There was nothing real about it. I mean, he was broke one day and had money the next day. So he thought he could get behind this, and suddenly he'd become this great, big, gigantic movie producer, and he'd get all the money back. He'd be famous again. That was the goal of going to L.A.
So at the time when he went to L.A., he didn't have money?
He probably didn't. I mean, I think a lot of it was paid in legal fees and fines. I think he had an awfully hard time holding on to that house, Ocean Castle. It really looked bad when he went out to L.A. It looked like it was going to fall down. I think a lot of his money was credit, but he felt he was also very lucky. And he decided if he could get out to L.A., anybody could be a movie producer, which was kind of his view of the world, that anyone could do it. All you needed was a big personality, which he, of course, had in spades, and he needed to meet the right people. And he didn't think he could do that on Long Island and in New York. So he ends up with his secretary, a young guy who turns out to be key in the story, Jonathan Lawson. He goes out to Los Angeles.
Okay, now, and then he met Laney Jacobs out there?
Well, Laney Jacobs, of the three main characters in this book, Robert Evans, Roy Radin, and Laney Jacobs, she is, to my eye, the most fascinating. Laney Jacobs, if you're familiar with the book, Bad Company, Laney in the early 80s was in Miami when Miami in the early 80s was the cocaine trafficking capital of the world. Miami in the early 80s was, there were so many drug-related murders in Miami that the city of Miami rented a refrigerated trailer from Burger King to store all the corpses. This is a city where in the early 80s, Ed, you could go to a high-end mall and the parking lot would have Mercedes and Rolls Royces and BMWs and Porsches in it, and inside there'd be a machine gun fight.
Uh-huh.
And Laney wanted that world. She wanted that money, and she went to Miami and began to meet different low-level and higher-level traffickers. At some point, she married a guy named Amir, who I interviewed in federal prison, and she got involved with a guy named Milan Belichazis, who just recently got out of federal prison in Florida. And he was a major, major cocaine dealer. There was so much money in South Florida in those days, Ed, that car dealerships, hotels, condos, restaurants, nightclubs, the whole scene was cocaine money. And Laney was so much a part of that, of going to these clubs and snorting cocaine and having a $500 bottle of champagne. But at some point, like Radin on Long Island needing to get away, she needed to get away. And she decided to get away from the men in her life, all of whom were traffickers, and take this wad of money that she had. And she would move to Los Angeles. And the deal for her was that she would keep up the cocaine business. So she had a man in Florida who every few weeks would load his car up with cocaine, and he would drive to her house in Sherman Oaks, where she was living and bought a beautiful home. And then she would hold it in her garage, and then people would come and distribute it for her. She was clearly on the hook to Belichazis and other big dealers in Miami. And then she got out there to Los Angeles, and she decided that even though she was still doing cocaine trafficking on a large scale on the side, that she too would become a movie producer. And oddly enough, two things happened in very quick order early in 1983. She meets Robert Evans, the legendary producer of such things as The Godfather and Chinatown, and she meets Radin. Radin goes to a party in the Hollywood Hills, and there is Laney Jacobs. And they meet, and he thinks of himself as incredibly lucky, and he lies to her and tells her he's got all the money in the world. And she says, well, this is really interesting, Roy, because I'm working with Bob Evans. We're going to raise money for a movie he's calling The Cotton Club. And he doesn't have any money, and I'm going to help him with my money, and you can bring in your money, and the three of us will be big-time movie producers. That was the first conversation he had with her very early in 1983.
Well, let me ask you a question. Okay, because we know Laney Jacobs, right? And she was definitely hobnobbing with these big billionaire coke dealers down in Florida. There's no doubt about that. And all the coke dealing. But now, Roy Radin, do you think maybe he was dealing coke too? Because he bought that mansion when he was like 20 years old.
I don't know that he was dealing, but he certainly used a massive amount of it. I mean, he could very well have been selling on the side, but he wasn't a trafficker like she was, on the scale she was. He was a heavy user. I mean, he was a guy that God knows how much he could snort.
Yeah, because you got to remember, he was 300 pounds.
He was a big, big guy,
yeah.
And all his tastes were big and extravagant. But she was the real deal. She,
right.
Among some of the Colombians and Cubans, particularly the Cubans who were the most violent in that world in Miami, she was kind of a black widow. A lot of men around her either disappeared or were never seen again or were dead. And the husband of hers that I interviewed in federal prison felt he was very lucky to be in federal prison just to get away from her. But she wanted lots and lots of money. And then at some point, Ed, she wanted prestige. And she thought being in Los Angeles with a pile of cash and flashing that cash around as I'm here to make movies in a city where movie producers are looking for money all the time, she thought she could pull that off.
Right, and the story is that Bob Evans was sitting in the back of his limo with his limo driver complaining that he needed money to put on this movie. And that
Evans is an amazing story. I spent a lot of time with him.
Oh, really?
When I was doing the book, yeah. He realized what I was doing, and he called me at one point and said, "Come on out and talk to me." And so I spent a lot of time with him. Whatever was going on in his life, and obviously there was a cocaine problem there too.
Right.
And he had that incredible house in the Hollywood Hills, or Beverly Hills, just an amazing place with a beautiful pool house in the back with a movie theater, and all his friends would come and watch movies in the back. But by the early 1980s, Ed, he was not getting the things done he needed done in spite of this amazing movie record of his. So I don't exactly know how he runs into Laney Jacobs. I suspect that she reached out to him. But the point is that they meet, and he looks at her as kind of the answer to his prayers, that she's going to bring in all the money that he can't find and can't do anymore. And she's going to make money for him, and he's going to return to the glory days in Hollywood where he was making money and going to parties and walking the red carpet. And exactly how much he knew of the source of her revenue is, of course, a pretty interesting question. There's no doubt in my mind that the source of her money was cocaine. I say in the book that Evans went to Miami with her and met Bella Jesus.
Really?
Perhaps he thought he was some other kind of person. But in Coconut Grove, where he had his mansion, it'd be pretty hard to think of him as anything but what he was. But to give Bob the benefit of the doubt, he thought he was a boxing promoter. So to Bob Evans, very, very eager to get back into the movie business, Laney Jacobs was a godsend.
You know, I recently watched, preparing for this interview, I watched an interview with Bob Evans. And in that interview, he claimed that he thought that Roy Radin was a member of the Rothschild family.
I hadn't heard that one. I don't know.
Came out of his mouth.
I don't know how many stories Roy Radin told about himself. He may have very well told that one. He was a con man. I mean, Roy was just not a very good one. I don't know how he conned people. I mean, the entertainers that I reached out to, who were all just a string of has-beens, they claimed that sometimes he'd pay him, sometimes he wouldn't. But he was a con man. He was a con artist. And he got out to L.A. hoping he could con his way into the movie business. And the thing is, Ed, when he met her and she said, "I'm going to introduce you to my partner, Bob Evans," I think at that point, Roy thought he was pretty lucky.
Okay, and at the time, now the story is that Evans and Jacobs were dating.
Well, yeah, that's the story that was told. There was some testimony to that, I think, at the trial, but I don't know the truth of it.
Okay, and now, I guess we can get into all that stuff later. But it also seemed that Jacobs sort of dated everybody in the story. Like, was she sleeping with Roy Radin as well?
I don't think with him, no. I think she was actually pretty disgusted by him.
Okay.
But there were lots of men who would come and go in her life. And the heart of her economic enterprise was this young guy who would literally drive from South Florida to Los Angeles about every couple of weeks with a truckload of cocaine. And she would store that in her garage. And then her distributors would come and take it and distribute it. And she would buy it, what was known at the time, on the come, meaning she would get it on credit from Florida, presumably Bella Jesus, and then she would pay that bill back when she sold it in L.A. and then keep the difference. So one day in that spring of 1983, which starts this whole chain reaction, Ed, someone goes into that garage and steals all the cocaine.
Yeah, and she thought that was, she got real paranoid about that.
She first thought it was Radin because they were feuding at that point over whose role was going to be bigger than the other one in this so-called movie, The Cotton Club. And she blamed him, although I don't think she actually thought he did it. I'm pretty sure she knew the courier took it because she stiffed the courier. But she, as a pretext, Ed, it was very convenient for her to blame Roy Radin for that. And it got ugly, and Roy knew it was ugly. And Roy, at that point, according to Jonathan Lawson, you can see in the book, Roy starts to get very, very scared. He now knows, Ed, if he didn't know it before, and of course he did, but I don't think the scale of it he knew, what he now knows after that theft, when he sees her and she gets in his face about it, he now knows this person is a very, very dangerous person and very high up in a very Cuban-centered cocaine ring. And at that point, in April, going into May 1983, Roy Radin is one scared cookie. And he's also at that point doing a lot of cocaine himself. So at that point, I think Roy begins to realize that he's in trouble, but he's not smart enough or has enough common sense to think, I need to get the hell out of here. But Jonathan Lawson, who was his very loyal secretary and sidekick, Lawson sees what's coming. And Lawson knows that this is a very, very bad situation to be in. That your supposed movie partner, production partner, which of course was a complete false story anyway, your movie production partner is accusing me of stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of cocaine. These people kill each other over far less. So at that point in early May 1983, late April, Lawson is in panic over this and is trying to get Roy away from these people. But of course he does not succeed.
Well, let me ask a question then. Now Roy Radin, here he has all these connections to all these cops, all these off-duty cops everywhere, and to these wise guys in New York City. Why couldn't he reach out to some of them for help?
Well, I suspect at that point he was so deep into drug use himself that he was not going to be able to make a common sense decision. I know that his Genovese family godfather, he was in communication with him, trying to find a way for him to help him. But he was kind of an old man at that point, the Genovese guy, and his advice was, just get out, get away from these people. I can't help you. But Roy was also very stubborn, and he felt he could make the deal with Bob Evans. So now you have a situation where Radin wants to cut her out and be Evans's movie partner, and Laney not only wants Roy out of the movie deal so she can make the Cotton Club with Bob Evans, but she also thinks he stole her cocaine. So now this group of three, it starts to get really, really ugly.
Well, now that's interesting. Now, 'cause I've always heard that Roy Radin had to deal with Evans, and he was trying to cut out Jacobs for $50,000.
Yeah, I think that at some point, just prior to the murder, even with all the tension over the theft of cocaine, which again she would have been on the hook,
right,
to Miami, and so she would have had to come up with the money to pay that off. In the middle of that, she thinks he's trying to push her out of the movie, and in fact he is trying to push her out. But there was nothing to be pushed out of. I mean, this was a fantasy among three people who weren't thinking very clearly. And Radin's position was, I came out here, I met Bob Evans, he's a legend, he has tremendous skills as a filmmaker, I'm going to make this movie with him, and I'm going to throw this bitch out. And, of course, she was way, way tougher than he was.
Yeah, but not only that, but why would Evans go for that deal when he's sleeping with Jacobs?
I think at that point, Bob was probably in his own level of panic and concern. I think he probably thought, how did I ever get in with these people?
You think so?
There was an incident where Evans was up in Las Vegas prior to the Radin murder.
Yeah.
And he has a conversation with someone in which he expresses some real concern about this. And he seemed to get a sense, some people interpreted what he said in Las Vegas to that he knew Jacobs was going to go after Radin. I'm not sure that's true, but I think what Bob knew, being a pretty smart guy, is that he knew what she was too. And he knew in that world, Ed, you don't come out alive. You don't come out at the other end.
Yeah, but not only that too, but then when you get into the trial, it came out that Jacobs was calling him up before the murders and called him up the night at the end of the night after the murders.
Yeah, there were definitely conversations just before and just after. Evans was called to the trial, and he took the fifth. He refused to testify. So exactly what he knew about her, and exactly did she say to him, I'm going to kill this guy and get him out of the way? I doubt she said that. I really do. But I think anyone who knew how that group operated know that the guns come out eventually. And in this case, they came out in an extremely violent way.
You know, lately, when Evans does interviews, and he kind of hints around, he says, yeah, we made a lot of deals on these tables in this house. Some legitimate, some not so legitimate. You know how he talks, yeah? And he's kind of hinting around, you know, that he's a little bit more flexible, you know, a little more flexible with the law, you know, than he's trying to portray himself back in the 80s. So he's almost kind of trying to brag about this kind of thing now. But my question to you is at that time, okay, the Robert Evans, who had all this kind of history, even stuff going back with the Polanski and all the shenanigans around the Manson murders and stuff like that, he was well acquainted with everyone and all of that stuff. So he's no shrinking violet. He's no angel. You know, then he did these mafia movies and stuff like that. You don't think that he was, like, he had enough juice of his own to protect himself in this situation, that he would be afraid of Evans and Jacobs?
I'm sure he was afraid of her. And I'm sure he thought Radin was an out-of-control, oversized, loudmouth con man. But no, I don't think Evans was in a position to go after them. That spring, the panic was over her and what she was going to do. She wanted Radin out. Radin wanted her out. They both coveted Bob Evans's friendship and closeness because they wanted him to make them a star. And that was really what was driving the two of them. But I don't think Bob at any point, I think at some point he just wanted to make sure that he didn't get caught up in this thing.
Yeah, because even when you consider Bob Evans again, really good friends with Henry Kissinger, you know, like.
Yeah, he's got. I mean, there were years where, you know, with the Ally McGraw years, where he was an enormous figure. There's no doubt about it. He is. I mean, his obit will be on the front page of the New York Times. He was a legendary movie producer. There's no getting around it. And to see him in that courtroom during the pretrial hearings, in which he was asked about the murder and he took the fifth, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and it's pretty amazing that he somehow skated from all this.
Well, he skated because there was no evidence that connected him to the actual events prior to the murder.
Yeah.
The prosecution in L.A., a very good assistant district attorney, felt very strongly that Laney Jacobs and the people she hired to do it, these really violent thugs, were the whole story. Now, did he want to bring Evans to talk about it and put him on the stand? Yeah. But Evans took the fifth, and the judge allowed him to take the fifth, and the case never went anywhere after that.
Who was Evans' attorney for that?
I forget who his attorney was at that point, but he had a big one out there. And again, the DA did not have anything solid. He may have had his own secret thoughts, but he didn't have anything he could put on the table to justify a murder charge.
Right.
And I think ultimately, Ed, I don't think Bob had anything to do with it. I think he knew what she could do and was scared of her and wished he hadn't gotten involved with her. And I think he wanted to get away from her as fast as possible. But to think of him as being involved with her and getting rid of Roy is ridiculous. That's just
really
what happened. Yeah.
Okay. Now, is there any video of those hearings of the Laney Jacobs trial? Laney Jacobs.
I don't think that we're doing any video at that point. We're now talking the fall of '85, winter of '86. I don't think there were cameras in the courtroom then.
Yeah, that would be before O.J., right? Yeah.
And that was, of course, an amazing trial. Amazing trial. She and her co-defendants and the violence they threw on Roy in that last night where they tortured him, really. I mean, there was a lot of sickness going on with that group, and she knew it.
Yeah, we'll get into it. I gotta read some live ads. So let me just give a word from our sponsors here, and then we'll get right back into this. Tonight we're with Steve Wick, Newsday journalist, Pulitzer Prize winner over there with Newsday magazine, author of Bad Company, Drugs, Hollywood, and the Cotton Club Murder by Steve Wick. You can find a link to that on my Amazon.com, on my blog, The Opperman Report. And tonight's show is brought to you by Pacific West Bamboo, 503-839-8126. Everybody knows Amanda down at Pacific West Bamboo. They're your number one source for timber construction and craft-grade bamboo poles, plants, and products. They specialize in eco-friendly reclaimed wood products for the home and garden. They're located in Portland, Oregon, but they can and do ship nationwide. That's 503-839-8126. Their Facebook page is Pacific West Bamboo. Their email is demroots@opperamail.com. But if you have trouble finding them, just contact me. I'll put you in touch with Amanda over there at Pacific West Bamboo. Another one of our sponsors is where is it? InfinityHomePlans.com. This is Mike Gray over at InfinityHomePlans.com. Check out Infinity Home Plans and Design Services, your resource for 3D and 2D architectural services. They offer a multitude of products, including stock home plans, 2D digital drawing sets, 3D models, and renderings, and more. That's Mike Gray over at InfinityHomePlans.com. Okay, don't forget emailrevealer.com, the home of the online infidelity investigation. If you think your spouse is cheating on you, you contact emailrevealer.com. You give them your spouse's email address, and they could trace that email address back to online dating websites. They have all kinds of services on there, like locates and people finder services, asset searches, employment locates. Let's say you got a situation with a custody child support litigation. Go to emailrevealer.com and you can locate your spouse's employer, so you can serve them with that child custody, that child support income execution. Then we got a brand new sponsor, okay, which is, they are called handcrafted-ethnic-jewelry.com. This is, you just Google New World Mexican Women. And this is a fascinating sponsor. This is New World Mexican Women. They wrote a book. This is a village, a group of villagers, women villagers in a village in Mexico. They've written a book, and it's called New World Women. Okay, and what their book is about is that they teach you how to make authentic Mexican jewelry. Okay, but you really got to visit their website, handcrafted-ethnic-jewelry.com, and you can see their videos on how to make this authentic Mexican jewelry. They have webinars. They have a book on how to make the jewelry. But they've also written a book of their love letters to their men that have left this village and come to the United States. Out of this village, there's like 3 million people that live in this village, and out of that, 800,000 are living in the United States, supporting this village. So this is our sponsor here. I'd really like to get people to really look into their situation down there. It's called New World Mexican Women, and the website is called handcrafted-ethnic-jewelry.com. But tonight we got Steve Wick, author of Bad Company, Drugs, Hollywood, and the Cotton Club Murder. Don't forget, by the way, we're on freedomslips.com. If you like what you hear and you want to support the station, it's a listener-sponsored station, so you have to go to freedomslips.com and click on the donate button in order to keep the station alive here and keep things going. Oh, my God. Okay, Steve, are you there?
Yep.
Okay, man. All right, now let's get into this whole thing. You were talking about these hitmen that Laney Jacobs got involved in. Now, what can you tell us about these guys?
Well, these guys were a group of incredibly violent men. And I don't know exactly how she got them out there, but they were part of her circle of people in the world that she traveled in. Not the the Hollywood, glamour world, obviously, but the world of the underworld that she was so much a part of. I mean, she comes to L.A., keep in mind, from that underworld in Miami, where big-time Cuban and Colombian drug traffickers were living in huge waterfront mansions on the Bay of Biscayne and buying every business in town. I mean, South Florida never had a recession. The drug money was so huge that the Federal Reserve branch there had a cash surplus of billions of dollars. So she's able to locate people. Once she decides that Radin is, I'm going to blame him for the cocaine theft. And B, once I get him out of the way, then Bob Evans and I can be partners. We can be whatever we want to be. And Laney Jacobs, are going to make this movie. So she brings in these really, really violent people. And at that point, I think Jonathan Lawson's panic level, when he realized what she was going to try to pull, I think he started to go crazy. And Radin, at that point, was using a lot of cocaine. He was sick with worry. But again, not sick enough to get on a plane and leave. He just tried to hunker down there because he thought, obviously stupidly, that he could outlast her and that she would go away and he could be with Bob Evans.
Just amazing. Now these hitmen that she hired, Mensker and Marti. Now these guys, they were drug dealers in their own right, doing their own drug dealing.
They were freelance criminals. I mean, they would do anything.
Right.
Absolutely anything. No doubt they had done many, many bad crimes over the years, and she knew of them. I don't know quite how, but she did. And she brings them in to kidnap and murder Roy Radin.
Okay, why don't you describe that, the evening of the murder?
The evening of the murders is it's a Friday night in L.A. It's the middle of May, 1983. And Radin and Jonathan Lawson had rented a hotel room on Sunset Boulevard. And he had not talked to Laney in a while, and then out of the blue, she calls. And she says, you know what, let's meet for dinner. And I'll have somebody pick you up. And Radin was, again, using a lot of cocaine at the time. Jonathan Lawson was sharp as a tack and says, do not go with her tonight. Do not do this. And Radin tried to outfox her. And he says, no, I can handle her. I can do this. And he gets a friend of his, from the actor in Sanford and Son, who was a friend of his.
Lamont Wilson.
Lamont Wilson.
Now, how did they become friends to begin with?
Well, again, part of that vaudeville weird circuit of producers who know talent looking to make any kind of money they can. So he calls him up, and he says to him, I'm going to need you to sit in a car outside my hotel at such and such a time on Friday night. And when you see me come out and get into a limo, I want you to follow that limo to a restaurant that we're going to have dinner with. Because I'm going to tell her off in the restaurant, and I'm going to storm out of the restaurant, and you're going to take me back to the hotel. I'm going to finally tell this woman off. So, again, Radin gets ready in the hotel room. Jonathan Lawson's begging him not to go, says it's a trap. He says it isn't. I'm going to tell this woman off. I got my friend Lamont to cover for me. No big deal. I can handle this. He goes downstairs. There's a limo waiting for him, Menser and Marty.
Yeah.
He gets in the limo. The limo pulls out. They're not stupid. They know they're being followed, and they lose Lamont in a follow-up car. Gone. He loses the car. He calls back to the hotel and tells Jonathan, I don't know where the car went. And they take Roy out into the desert, and they did him in.
Now, wasn't Lamont Wilson? Now, wasn't he was a little out of it that night as well?
he was clearly out of it.
Right.
He was clearly not in any shape to be either a bodyguard or to do surveillance in any meaningful way. Again, it's just all part of the pathetic nature of this.
Yeah, because now he showed up at the restaurant later on that night.
He shows up, but there's no Roy Radin.
Right.
Because Jonathan tells him where they were supposed to go after Lamont can't follow the limo. And they lose him, and they go out of the city, and Roy's in the back seat with these guys.
But back to the restaurant with Lamont, though, because now I'm a little unclear on this. Now, did the cops actually come to the restaurant that night because he was so out of it, or?
No.
No, okay. The cops questioned later on, okay.
Jonathan, the next morning, realizes Roy has not come back, and
right.
He calls the police to report him as a missing person.
And that's when they went to the restaurant to check things out. They says, "Oh yeah,
and
Lamont."
So they now try to follow the route that they took, and they
right.
interview Lamont, and they realize the guy never went to the restaurant. But it's quite a few days after that fact.
But now back to Lamont again. He's gotten so shook up by this chain of events that today he's a Christian minister.
He is a very popular minister.
Really?
With his own flock. I think that event that night with his friend getting murdered, if that was it, or he just couldn't find work anymore in Hollywood, I don't know what the precipitating event was, but the point of the matter is that from this point on, he's a changed man.
Yeah, and he actually wrote a book. Are you familiar with the book he wrote?
No, I'm not.
It's very interesting. He talks about how commercial jingles and TV shows and cartoons and stuff like that are all satanically motivated, and or New Age things like that are all like almost like some kind of demonic brainwashing.
Hmm.
It's very interesting. I'd love to get him on the show, but I've had a little trouble trying to locate him.
Yeah, I don't even know where he is anymore.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, his evening as a bodyguard surveillance guy was a complete bomb. And Roy knows that once he's in that limo, that this was not a dinner reservation with Laney Jacobs.
Yeah, it was pretty quick that they pulled the gun on him and stuff. As soon as he got in the car, I believe.
Well, once he got in the car, he knew he wasn't going to get out, and they were screaming at him in the back seat. They had their guns out, and they drove to a prearranged spot north of Los Angeles, where they marched him up a dirt road and executed him. Okay,
but now, again, there were indications out there at the murder site that they were there for quite a bit of time.
I think that they kept him alive for a long time.
Yeah. Now, what do you think was going on up there? Because there's been a lot of stories.
Well, it could have been anything from, where do you have money hidden somewhere? Did you steal the cocaine? To just them having a sick joy of torturing this guy.
Yeah, because Marty was definitely a sick guy who enjoyed killing people.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, he said, I think a quote from him was, he would love a job where he could go around shooting black people, but he would shoot Jews for free.
Yeah. He, for some reason, I don't know how they would have known other than Laney Jacobs, they knew that Roy's father was Jewish, not his mother, but his father. And that they were screaming at him in the backseat of the car.
Oh, really?
They loved it for that reason.
Really? Okay.
Oh, yeah, they were. This was a war group.
Yeah, we'll get into that. We're going to get into that even more. Okay, but now again, back to the murder scene. Now, beer cans. Yeah, they were there for a while. Okay, and they even had taken all their empty shells, their bullet shells casings, and had made a little pile out of them.
Yeah, they were going crazy up there. I mean, they were pretty far off the road. They could shoot their guns and not get heard. They could scream and yell at Roy. They could kick him and hit him.
Did you ever get a chance to talk to any of the hitmen?
No.
Okay.
They got everything they wanted out of that evening, which was really sick.
Now, what about
once he's dead? They decide to put half a stick of dynamite in his mouth.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting too that not interesting, but a note in this is that Roy Radin, a 300-pound man, that his remains, I believe, only weighed 65 pounds. what was left of him to be sent back to be buried in New York City.
There was very little left,
both
from the heat and the coyotes and everything else up there. And the body showed terrible signs of abuse, let alone half a stick of dynamite shoved in his mouth.
Now, what about the legend says that these two hitmen, they claim that they shot him 13 times on Friday the 13th?
That's certainly part of the lore. I don't think the police could actually tell from the condition of the corpse what that was, but knowing these guys, it's no doubt true.
Because it came out in the recorded conversations when the guy Larry Flint's brother-in-law, Ryder, when he made those undercover recordings, they were bragging about that.
Yeah, they bragged about a lot of things that I think that the detectives I talked to they didn't really know how much of that was true, how much of that was just them talking, but clearly they boasted in a very humorous way as to what they did with Roy.
Yeah, they couldn't stop talking.
No, they couldn't stop talking.
Yeah, now you would think on the one hand that these guys were such amateur hour, but on the other hand, they were hired in a couple of other pretty big murders. You're familiar with the case with the PI in California? I think his name is Pascal.
Pascal, yeah.
Yeah.
That's an interesting case too.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I don't know that much about it. It was kind of a sideshow but he was enough involved with them to know who and what they were. The tentacles of these guys, Ed, are really deep, and there's no doubt a lot of unsolved murders connected to them. But the thing that really stands out is the torture and the glee they took in getting rid of this guy. So she must have given them instructions as to what to do, and then they ran with it. And somehow, him being the son of a Jewish man, brought out the worst, particularly in Marty.
Well, that's interesting, too, because now there was also nearby the crime scene, the murder scene, a Bible was open to the book of Isaiah. What do you think about that? Is it, again, folklore, or?
I think it's folklore. I don't really know what to make of that. So much has come out since then.
Yeah.
And none of these guys have talked, and they're in prison for life without parole. So they're all going to die in prison. And Laney was, of course, back in L.A. trying to be the big cheese when these guys are off torturing Roy. And, of course, she would have found out later that night that Roy was dead. And I think at that point, Ed, she could have called back to Miami to Bella Chase's or to whomever and said, well, I've solved the problem of the guy that stole the cocaine. He's dead. And, of course, in her mind, she's now thinking, now I'm free to make a deal over a movie. And, of course, Bob Evans wanted nothing to do with her.
That's interesting. Okay, now wait a second, because now they didn't discover Roy Radin's body for months.
They didn't discover it for months, and my gut feeling is that Bob Evans sensed from her and her demeanor what she was capable of doing.
Right.
And he didn't want any part of it. And
so he cut her off after that murder. I
think once Roy is gone, either Bob just senses it or whatever.
Right.
He doesn't want anything to do with her. She's now, in his world, persona non grata. And there's an unsolved murder going on.
Right.
And there's a man being looked for by the sheriff's department who's not been found. I mean, that's, in that world out there, someone comes to Los Angeles to make a movie and he disappears, that's unheard of. And we were covering back at Newsday, and I think the LA Times was as well, that this Roy Radin was now a missing person case. Bob would have seen all those stories. He would have known what was going on. And, of course, he had to have suspected her.
Well, yeah. But also, too, did the police come and question Evans at that point?
I don't believe so, no, but I don't know the answer to that.
Right, okay, that's interesting. Now, these hitmen, again, they're often described as Larry Flint's bodyguards. What's the connection between them and Larry Flint?
They knew him, and Flint knew them. They were sort of part of his inner world, but I don't know how I don't think there's any evidence at all that would suggest Larry used them for criminal acts, but they knew him and he knew them. And in terms of tabloid journalism, it was a very easy hook to say that he was there, that Larry Flint's bodyguards, were now suspects in a murder. But clearly they knew each other and knew of each other.
Oh, yeah. And Larry Flint's brother-in-law, this guy Ryder, who was an ex-cop, he's the one who made the undercover tapes of these guys, Marti and Mensker. And some of those tapes were made inside Larry Flint's mansion.
Correct.
Have you listened to all those tapes?
I heard them at the trial. Oh. Yeah, they're pretty amazing.
Oh, man, I would love to get a hold of that.
They are pretty amazing.
I can only imagine.
The conversations, the loose talk about crimes committed, it's astonishing.
Now, again, back to this guy Ryder. Okay, because he was involved in that other murder with Pascal as well, the one of the 250-pound black prostitute phone
Correct.
sex operator, right?
Yeah.
Now, in that case, okay, it is very interesting. In that case, Ryder actually loaned the gun to Mensker that Mensker used in the murder.
Is that what it was? I forget. I don't remember that.
Yeah. And then he wound up working with the cops, getting paid by the cops. You know what I'm saying? Like, this guy Ryder got some great deal in all this, didn't he?
Yeah, he came out ahead. He didn't get wrapped up in these really awful murders.
No, and he wound up getting paid. He got a paycheck.
Yeah, I don't know where he is today, but
well, I hope he's not near me. I tell you that.
Yeah,
yeah.
He's probably in some kind of witness protection program or something.
You think so? Okay, and he's related to Larry Flint as his brother-in-law. How is that? Do you know?
They continuously called him that. I don't know whether he married Larry's sister or I don't really know.
Okay, boy, I tell you, what an amazing story, man. Well, let me ask you a question too. Now, when you Google Laney Jacobs, right? When you Google her name, and you go into Google Images, right? There's some really interesting pictures that come up. A picture comes up of Mensker standing in front of a pentagram with a gun with a silencer on it. Have you ever seen that?
I've not seen that one. No, there's photos all over the place that have materialized. I was briefly getting phone calls and letters from a woman who claimed to be Mensker's ex-wife.
Okay.
And talking about him and all the things that she thinks he did. He was into all kinds of stuff, but I always thought Mensker was world-class different than Marty. Marty just seemed like a Nazi. I mean, an SS officer. I mean, he seemed like a really bad actor. Now,
Marty was from where? Argentina, something like that?
I think he was from Argentina, yeah.
Now, is there any truth that he was involved in the Argentinian secret police or something down there? You hear those stories as well?
I doubt that. I think he brought his own legend with him.
Yeah, because he was a young man, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he was a part of that.
Okay, but now back to Mensker. There's all kinds of stories about Mensker and accusations and suspicion and the theories. Now, what do you think about these theories? Now, some people describe Mensker as being the second Manson. Are you familiar with that?
No. What was that story?
Okay, well, are you familiar with the stories about the possibility that Mensker was the Zodiac killer?
I've not heard that either, no.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty interesting because it kind of fits with his timeline, going to Vietnam and coming back and stuff like that and being in California. And also, they took some pictures of him and they put the glasses over him of one of the sketches of the Zodiac, and it's a pretty decent theory. There's been so many others, and it seems like they got the guy on Zodiac, but it's just an interesting tidbit to this whole story. Now, are you familiar? Yeah, go ahead.
No, he certainly would fit the notion of that kind of a person, but I don't know. It doesn't seem to me like it ever tied together.
Yeah, definitely it seems to have fallen apart. Now, what about the theories, the accusations? Okay, you know what? This is a good time to take a break. We're taking our break. This is that nice long break I was telling you about. You can go to the bathroom and have a drink. And we're here with Steve Wick, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, author of Bad Company, Drugs, Hollywood, and the Cotton Club Murder. We'll be back right after this. It's more of Radin and Robert Evans from the Godfather fame. and Laney Jacobs. And we're going to get into Laney Jacobs. Her woman has such bad luck. After all of this, there's more deaths follow her after this. And she's in prison now. Thank God for that. But we'll be right back after this nice, long, relaxing break with Steve Wick, author of Bad Company, Drugs, Hollywood, and the Cotton Club Murder. Go to my blog, see the Opperman Report. I'm going to have some links on there for some of Steve's other books on our Amazon. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, author of the book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator. You can find it on my website, emailrevealer.com. Every Friday night, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, you can find us here on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, simulcast on CJ Mars Radio and 365 Live, and shoutcast.com. And by next week, I think we're going to have it all together. That we're going to be live on my Spreaker channel, the Opperman Report Spreaker channel. We're going to be live there, and also too, I'm working on a couple other stations to simulcast this on Friday. We're going to be on about 5 stations on Friday nights. Tonight, by the way, if you like what you're hearing, please go to freedomslips.com and click on the donate button, and to keep that station going, to support the station. I think they're about halfway to their goal this month. It's a listener-sponsored station. They take no corporate sponsorship, so we got to keep them going. Also, to Hazy Radio, we're on during the week on twice a week on hazyradio.com, and they're having some financial struggles over there as well, so they're looking for donations. So please contact hazyradio.com and try and support them as well. Tonight we got Steve Wick, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist from the Newsday magazine. Bad Company, Drugs, Hollywood, and the Cotton Club Murder. Now this book is referenced anytime you read a story about an article or a TV show about this case. Everybody references Steve Wick. He's written the Bible on this book. So here we are, Steve. You back?
Oh yeah, I'm here.
Nice long break, right? You get to take a little nap.
That was very nice.
I know. Okay, man. Why don't we finish up with Laney Jacobs and the tragedy that befell her after this? Because she didn't get arrested on this right away. How many years was she out running around after this murder?
Well, this is one of the more amazing aspects of the story that's told in Bad Company. And for me, as a journalist, researching it, is that when I finally figured out what happened to her, mind you, the body's found weeks after his death. He's now a murder victim, and a murder victim that was a brutal murder victim, the body blown up, the head blown up. And Laney stuck around Hollywood long enough to realize that any attempt on her part to be a movie producer was now over. So she moved back to Florida, and in Florida, she meets a man named Larry Greenberger. Now, you got to admit,
before she left, though, the cops wanted to question her on this, right?
The cops definitely wanted to question her, but she wouldn't allow it to happen, and there was no evidence to hold her. Once the cops interviewed Jonathan Lawson,
right?
Jonathan Lawson told them that Roy was going to meet Laney at a restaurant. So they had every reason to be questioning Laney Jacobs and to find out where she was, but they also had no reason to hold her. So the detectives that I talked to for the book were loosely trying to keep track of her whereabouts, but unless something broke in L.A., they had no way to arrest her.
Yeah, but they had enough juice to bring her in. Who was her lawyer there in California that was able to hold that off?
Well, she certainly had lawyers, but there was just simply that the assistant district attorney in charge of the case did not think he could prosecute her, didn't think he had enough.
No, I know that, but they could pick her up for questioning.
They could have picked her up for questioning, but the lawyer blocked it and said, you can't talk to my client without me.
Yeah.
So she ends up leaving and moves back to Florida. Now, the cops were informally looking for her because this was a very celebrated and very horrific open murder investigation. So at this point, I'm poking around in it, and I realized that this woman was in Okeechobee, which is a funky little farm town in north central Florida. It seemed like a very odd place for someone who had traveled in the universe of cocaine in Miami and Los Angeles. But nonetheless, she is, when I figured out where she was, Ed, she was married to a guy named Larry Greenberger. Now, Larry Greenberger is as fascinating a story as she is. Larry Greenberger, out of college, realizes that there is a whole universe of money to be made in the distribution end of cocaine. And Larry, soon after college, becomes the Florida distributor for Carlos Later, the big Colombian cocaine dealer. And Larry starts to bring a business mind and a business sense to this, and he starts making untold sums of money. Mm. Where they met, I don't know. I never figured out exactly how Larry runs into Laney and Laney runs into Larry, but clearly the two knew what the other person was. She knew that he had made a fortune in distribution and was now living kind of a retired gentleman on a farm, in an old farmhouse in Okeechobee, Florida. And certainly he knew enough about her to know that she'd put a lot of money together herself. So they get married. And this is now several years after the unsolved murder in Los Angeles. And Laney's beginning to think, well, you know, maybe I got away with it. Maybe they don't have it. They'll never be able to put it together. But unbeknownst to her, some very good detectives in Los Angeles were not going to ever let this case go. And they kept looking for people who knew of the murder and knew the people who did it to find evidence. And they slowly start to piece together enough so that they can wire up Ryder and get people to talk. And once that happens, Ed, then the circle begins to tighten around her. Now, at the same time that those detectives have really started to put a solid case together in L.A. for Mentzer and Marty and for Laney, she and Larry, back in Okeechobee, Florida, the marriage is beginning to go sour. She wants his money. She wants to know where he's keeping the fortune that he made, and he won't tell her. She gets herself a young boyfriend.
It was the nanny. They called him the nanny, right?
It claimed to be the nanny for the son named Dax, D-A-X, who was her son from a guy named Joe Amir, who at that point was still in federal prison for cocaine dealing. And so she has a boyfriend, and she has a keen desire to understand where Larry's millions are. But Larry, like Radin, is begin to sense that this person is not anyone I want to be around. And he's got problems of his own, including he's now using the cocaine that he once distributed for millions of dollars. So he violated a very fundamental rule of cocaine distribution, which is never use it yourself. And he did. And he starts to really lose it. And one night, one summer night in Okeechobee, he's sitting in a chair out on a little porch, and he is shot through the head, the right temple, I believe. And the police come, and Laney says, my husband committed suicide. But what happens at this point, Ed, is pretty fascinating. The detectives back in L.A. hear about this through the law enforcement grapevine. And they have now, at this point, reached critical mass in Los Angeles to make an arrest in the Radin case. So two detectives fly to Florida. And on the very day that Laney Jacobs is going to go to the airport to leave, I believe she was going to go to Spain with her money. Larry's money, her money, whatever. She was going to leave the country on this very day. When, guess what? One of the detectives from Los Angeles calls her on the phone.
Right.
And says, hey, you got 5 minutes? We just need to clear up a couple things about this case. She thinks it's about Larry Greenberger. And she thinks, well, I got this covered. It's a suicide. The cop doesn't say it's about Roy Radin. He says, well, I understand you're on your way to the airport. We just need a few minutes to talk to you about the case. And she thinks it's about Larry. So literally en route to the airport to leave the country for good, she goes and meets two Los Angeles County sheriff's detectives. They meet her at a hotel room. They cuff her. She asks us, "What's it about?" And one of them says, "The murder of Roy Radin." And she nearly falls over. She can't believe it. She cannot believe it after all these years.
Now, wasn't there something in this timeline as well where that Mensker was sitting in jail for the other murder, the first one of the black prostitute?
The black prostitute. Well, those guys were beginning to come undone out there, and Ryder, of course, now is an informant for the detectives. But Menser's not talking, and Marty's not talking. But Ryder begins to get enough on these tapes, particularly with Marty shooting his mouth off, that it's enough to make an arrest. But I think, Ed, that it's probable that once Larry Greenberger was murdered, and the cops knew that she was a suspect in that murder and could possibly leave the country, they had to close the door on her for Radin. I think ideally maybe they would have gone a little bit longer to try to get more on tape. But they knew she had the money. They knew she had the means. She's now a suspect in another murder. The cops in Okeechobee can't pick her up because forensically they don't quite have it yet. They don't know who did it. Did the nanny do it or did she do it? So they're a ways away from making a case when the two cops from L.A. land in Florida and con her into meeting them to talk about the case.
Right.
And at that point, the door closes on Laney Jacobs.
But she was never convicted on the Greenberger case, was she?
It's wide open. And
Wow.
I talked to Larry's sister. I haven't talked to her this year, but I talked to her frequently. And I've talked to the cops down there, and it seems to me this is one of these situations that are kind of tragic for the victim's family. But I think their view in Florida is she's in prison for life without parole in California. What's the point of flying her back here to put her on trial and get life without parole here? But for the family, it's a very unsatisfactory end.
Yeah, no, I hear that for sure. Yeah. Now, when she had after the murder of Radin, she kind of hung out with Mensker. They were dating and they were living together. They were sleeping together. They were traveling together.
Mensker was definitely a lover of hers in that post-Radin world, and then that ended, and she's gone. Again, the most amazing thing for me as a writer on this book, Ed, is how you go from the frying pan into the fire. How is it you leave L.A. in the wake of an unsolved murder? You're so steeped in violence and criminal behavior that you're actually sleeping with one of the murderers of Roy Radin. And she doesn't make any attempt to clean herself up. And she goes back to Florida and meets and marries one of the biggest distributors ever. A man, God knows how much that man was worth at the time of his death.
Now, wasn't he hooked up with that group, too, called The Company, with that guy Fuzzy Thornton?
He might have been. My sense was, from everyone down there, that his claim to fame was that Carlos later appointed him his North American distributor.
Wow.
And you can imagine what that meant. That meant hundreds of airplanes, hundreds of boats, hundreds of couriers, an enterprise built around the movement of cocaine.
And there he was living in that little Okeechobee town.
He was living in Okeechobee in an old farmhouse.
Oh, my God.
I walked all through the house because I was trying to figure out how anyone could believe this was suicide.
Yeah.
And it was bizarre to me why he was there. I sort of think, and it was at the end of a long gravel road, and I kind of think he thought that people would come for him eventually, too.
Right.
And I think he wanted a life away from everyone, so at least he'd know if people were coming to kill him. And he didn't know it was going to be the woman he was married to. I think he probably thought it was going to be some other distributors.
Yeah.
But he was, quote-unquote, retired. And she wanted that money. She had this business idea of plastic surgery clinics.
Right.
That would be franchised. And she kept telling Larry, I want your money to do this. And he kept saying, "You're not going to get my money."
Right. She had some kind of a deal where she would arrange trips to, I think, Mexico or something, where they can get real cheap plastic surgery and then fly them back.
Yeah, she really thought that she was going to be, this giant in the plastic surgery world.
Right.
And in order to pull that off,
she had to kill somebody to take their money.
She needed Larry's money. Had Larry given her the money, he'd be alive today.
Yeah, you think so?
But
then again, she had that boyfriend, though. Now
she had a boyfriend,
yeah.
And Larry was also sinking like a rock because of his own cocaine use, his extreme paranoia. I mean, when you work for Carlos later, you're going to think they're going to come get you at some point. It's an amazing. It remains for me, as a journalist who's done this for a lot of years, this story, first the L.A. story of Roy Radin, and then a very second and very distinct story of Larry Greenberger. It remains an absolutely amazing case to me.
Yeah, now how come a story like this has never been optioned, even for a Lifetime movie, like even a TV movie?
Well, it has been. It's been optioned, I don't even know how many times, but everyone who options it has never been able to get the horsepower to get it done. Okay. And that's just the truth.
Yeah, is that because of people who have enough power to keep it silent?
Well, I kind of think that people are uncomfortable about making a movie involving a big player in Hollywood.
Right.
It's puzzling because before the book even came out, it was being optioned. And it's been optioned for years afterwards. And yet, at no point did anyone successfully pull it off. And you can imagine that. If you were an actress, the role of Laney Jacobs, that could be the best role you could ever have in your life. You're not going to get a better female role than that.
Oh yeah, that's Academy Award territory.
That's Academy Award stuff. And can you imagine an actor being able to play Bob Evans and a big fat guy playing a con man named Roy Radin? I mean, think of those three characters in one movie. A cunning, conniving woman who's got tremendous business savvy, tremendous money. There's a scene, her husband Joe Amir told me, where one night they were in their bedroom in their house in Miami weighing money on a scale. There was so much of it.
Yeah. You would think that Bob Evans would produce the movie. And do it like The Godfather. This is an incredible story, man.
It's a great story, and one day someone will figure out how to do it.
Okay, now let me ask you about this, okay? Because now a guy who's sitting in prison in New York State named David Berkowitz, right? Now he comes out, and he makes all these accusations now about Roy Radin and about Mensker and all this other stuff. What do you think about all that?
I think it's nonsense.
Really?
Yeah, I think Berkowitz is completely insane. Was there a devil-worshipping cult aspect to Berkowitz's life? Absolutely. But the notion that it involves the Radin murder is just nonsense.
Okay, that involves the Radin murder. Okay, but now what do you think about Roy Radin being involved with the Protestant Church in New York City?
I never saw any evidence of that. This guy was not that smart. He was not that conniving. He was a con man that anyone had half a brain could see through, but the people he dealt with didn't have half a brain. I don't see him involved in that world. I just don't see it. But with a guy like that, you're not going to know everything about his life, and he was certainly into some weird shit.
Well, give me an example. What other weird stuff?
Well, he obviously brought women out to the mansion, prostitutes, for the weekend.
Right.
He used copious amounts of cocaine. But I never saw anything beyond just normal excess. I never saw devil worshipping or the kind of stuff that Berkowitz and that one book talk about. I just don't see it.
Okay, but then what about Mensker? Because we know Mensker. There's a picture of him standing in front.
Yeah, there's a picture of him, and he could very well have been a part of that world. Not Marty. Marty was just into drugs and killing people. As you say, he'd have given his left, pinky to kill a Jew. He loved that. But Mensker was a complicated, violent guy, and as I said, an ex-wife contacted me for a while. I haven't heard from her recently, and she said he tried a lot of stuff, from devil worshipping to But clearly the bad guy in that mix is Marty. The guy torturing Evans or torturing Radin is Marty. The guy putting the dynamite in his mouth is Marty.
Yeah,
Marty's a sick guy.
Yeah, even Marty was saying that that Metzger had to drink a pint of wine before he had the guts to shoot anybody or to do anything.
Yeah, he was drunk probably as they got into the limo. When Roy stepped into that limo, that's the thing about Jonathan Lawson understanding where this thing was going and begging him not to go that night because of this stupid Lamont Wilson. I mean, my God, who could ever think that guy was going to be your bodyguard? But the thing is that once Roy got in that limo and he realized in the back seat was Menser and Marty, it was all over. He was not going to get out.
Why do you think that Jacobs and Marty and Menser couldn't get together and come up with a cohesive defense where they all had the same defense and not turn against each other?
I think the evidence on the Ryder tapes was so overwhelming, and the crimes so violent. They'd have killed each other if they could have. She'd have killed both of them if she thought it would do her any good. She'd have killed all of them. I mean, these are bad people who end up killing each other. I think had there not been an arrest for Radin when it came because of the Greenberger thing, it's a really important point. I think had Larry Greenberger given Laney his money for the plastic surgery clinics and they'd stayed together as a couple, even though she had a boyfriend, I think that the cops would have gone a little bit longer investigating the Radin thing, and I would be willing to bet you $100 that they would have stumbled upon all kinds of other criminal deeds. And at some point, I think if Laney, sitting in a farmhouse in Florida, thought someone in L.A. was going to start talking about her, she'd have had him killed.
Yeah, it seems odd with their resources that they didn't go clean up this thing anyway.
They didn't, but I don't think they were. We've all met criminals who are so arrogant that they think they can get away with anything.
Yeah, on the tapes, 4 months later, these guys, Marty and Metzger, were bragging, saying that we got away with this, the foolproof murder, because it's been 4 months. And
the whole point of the dynamite, which is really pathetic, was to blow up his teeth, so they couldn't identify him. So they thought they had their trail covered. And in fact, they didn't quite understand how long it would take, and the cops stick on these. They stay on these things.
Yeah.
And Bob, in the years afterwards, Bob Evans successfully shook off any doubt that he had some role in it. He shook all that off, and he, being the showman that he is, and a very smart showman, he kind of reinvented himself several times over.
Is he doing anything now at all?
I don't think so. I mean, a documentary came out about him, 5 or 6 years ago?
Yeah, and they had a cartoon about him, too.
that was very, very well received.
Yeah.
But he's now 84, I believe.
Yeah.
And he was lucky, and I think he told me once he was very lucky. He knew she was bad.
Okay, well, now tell me about that. He invited you into that home.
Yeah, I went to his home actually a couple times. He knew when he would call me, when you're out here, please come see me. I think he was very concerned that I would say something in the book that he couldn't shake off.
Right.
And believe me, I worked really hard on that book, and I came to believe that Bob Evans had nothing to do with the murder. I came to believe that he knew she was bad, and he had to get away from her, but he didn't. He would never have ordered someone's death. I mean, that's her 100%. But he was smart enough, gifted enough as a producer and a filmmaker and a showman himself that he could keep that dream going. He kept his house, the big house up in Beverly Hills.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anyone's heard anything about him recently. Maybe he's just gotten heavy into old age. I don't know. But the times I spent with him, Ed, were pretty cool. He was. I had breakfast with him one day back in that pool house where he had that later burned down, I think, and destroyed all that was in it. But we had breakfast, and he just talked about his life and all the things he tried to do as a producer. and the mistake of meeting this woman and this fat guy from New York. But he shook it off, and he will be regarded as one of the great movie producers of all time.
Oh yeah, you got to give him credit.
You can't make Chinatown. You can't make Chinatown and The Godfather and not have people think you're pretty smart.
Yeah, Rosemary's Baby, and and all that.
All those.
Love Story. Love
Story, exactly. And then of course, being married to Ally McGraw, who leaves him for Steve McQueen.
Yeah, the guy had a cool life, and I love that movie too. The kid stays in the picture.
The kid stays in the picture. I mean, he had a fairy tale existence out there.
Yeah, he really did. And I'm going to put a link to that movie, on the blog too, because I tell you, it's a great movie.
It is. But the big mistake he made was looking for money through Laney Jacobs. That was the big mistake he made. But the fight is not with Bob and Laney; it's between Laney and Roy. That's the war going on in Los Angeles at that time. It's those two, and then in the middle of their arguing over who's going to be Bob's partner, the cocaine disappears. Literally disappears out of the garage. Amazing. Imagine taking boxes and boxes and boxes, several $1 million worth of cocaine out of somebody's garage.
Yeah,
they're not going to live.
Yeah, they all had the combination to the safe.
There's no doubt it was the courier.
Yeah.
And she knew it was the courier, but it was convenient for her to blame it on Roy.
Oh boy, okay, let me read some live ads here. Let's take a little break. This is just incredible. We got with us tonight Steve Wick, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, author of Bad Company, Drugs, Hollywood, and the Cotton Club Murders. Fascinating story about Roy Radin and Bob Evans and Laney Jacobs. Incredible stuff. Don't forget this show is brought to you by a village in Mexico, believe it or not. This group of women, these villagers in Mexico, in a town of Guerreras, and they've written a book, and they have a YouTube video and a webinar on how to create authentic Mexican jewelry. Their book is self-published. It's up on lulu.com. And it's a beautiful book about their letters of these women that they've written back to their men, their grandfathers and their husbands and their sons who've come to America to work and to send money back to them. And they've written these love letters to them, and it's called New World Mexican Women. And you can find it on their website called handcrafted-ethnic-jewelry.com. And just Google New World Mexican Women, and all their stuff will come up. Their Facebook page will come up, and their book and their videos and stuff. Just a fascinating group of women and their authentic story of their love for their men who've come to the United States. And we also have as a sponsor InfinityHomePlans.com. That's Mike Gray. And he has all kinds of services. Check out Infinity Home Plans and Design Services, your resource for 3D and 2D services. They offer a multitude of products, including stock home plans, 2D digital drawing sets, and 3D models and renderings, and more. Don't forget emailrevealer.com. Are you looking for a lost loved one, or an old friend, or a long-lost family member? Go to emailrevealer.com and do one of those people searches where you can locate somebody. Or let's say you have an email address and you need to identify or locate the person behind that email address. Go to emailrevealer.com. Then we have Pacific West Bamboo, our oldest and most supportive sponsor that keeps the show going. 503-839-8126. If you got a craft, you have a construction project, you want to put down a flooring, you want to build a stage for a rock concert, go to Pacific West Bamboo, your number one source for timber construction and craft-grade bamboo poles, plants, and products. They specialize in eco-friendly reclaimed wood products for the home and garden. They're located in Portland, Oregon, but they can and do ship worldwide. 503-839-8126, Pacific West Bamboo. And we're here tonight with Steve Wick, author of Bad Company, Drugs, Hollywood, and the Cotton Club Murders. Hey, Steve, you wrote a couple other books. Why don't you tell us about those real quick?
Well, the second book was a look at life out in Long Island, where I live, and the old farm families are there. And then the third book that came out a couple summers ago is called The Long Night, and it's about the journalist William L. Shirer, who in 1960 published the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, the very famous book about the Hitler years. And Shirer was a journalist in Berlin from 1934 to 1940. And the book is about those 6 years that he was in Nazi Germany as a journalist for CBS Radio.
Wow.
And that's a terrific story of a guy from Iowa who ended up going to, as a journalist, was in Paris and Spain and ended up in Berlin just after Hitler came to power, and left in December of 1940 when he was about to be arrested by the Gestapo because they wanted to frame him as a spy. But he was working for Edward R. Murrow at that point for CBS Radio. It's a fantastic story.
Hey, are you working on any books coming up?
The Radin murder is one of those just amazing stories.
Yeah, I know. And I'd say every book, every article, whatever, they always cite your book and Steve Wick as a reference.
At one point there were going to be 10 other books on that case, and none of them came out. Mine came out first, and I think it kind of shut everyone up. No one else did it at that point. And, I know there were several book contracts underway.
Yeah, but you want to know what? I think it's a story that can handle 10 books.
Well, I think someone ought to go back to it.
Yeah.
Someone ought to go back and look at it, and I think someone needs to write about the death of Larry Greenberger, because Larry's family deserves closure in that, and Laney executed her own husband. Think of this, Ed. She had a man executed and tortured in Los Angeles in 1983, and a few short years later, she has her own husband killed. That's
just what we know about.
And that's only the ones that we know about. If you're a Cuban dealer in the country illegally in 1981 and you crossed her, she could kill you and dump your body in Biscayne Bay, and that'd be the end of it.
Yeah, right. Hey, and give us an idea of you said you were talking to Metzger's first wife or ex-wife.
Well, I've talked to lots of them. I had a woman write me for years who said, I never quite believed it, but that's not true. I don't know whether to believe it or not, but she said she was Laney's cellmate in a prison in Northern California, and talked about her in jail being a very gregarious person who organized prison events. She's appealed. Laney's appealed. They've all appealed. It's all been turned down. She will die in prison.
Wait, organized prison events like prison parties and stuff?
Yeah. She sort of became a sorority sister or something.
Oh, it's like that movie, that TV show, Orange is the New Black.
Yeah, she's only a murderer. Yeah, exactly. Yes. But how are you doing? How's the show going? You think it's a good show tonight?
Oh, yeah. Are you kidding me? Yeah, this is excellent stuff. I thank you very much for coming on, man. This is great.
Oh, I'm really glad to be here. I think talking about this case, and I haven't talked about it in a long time, and I think that, to me, this is one of the great stories that I was lucky enough to work on.
Yeah, it really is. Every now and then you'll see a true Hollywood story kind of thing on it, but they only touch the surface.
This one involves big players, and you normally, Ed, don't go to Hollywood to make movies and get murdered. Just think about that for a second. The guy goes to Hollywood to make a movie, and he's murdered.
And it's more interesting too that even when Robert Evans, when he does make the movie tanks horribly.
It didn't do well.
I tell you, you gotta love Bob Evans, and like I said, that the documentary, the kid stays in the picture.
Yeah, he's a genuine character.
Yeah,
he is a genuine legend, and he's a genuine character. And in many ways, I came to like him a lot. I do believe strongly that he got in with the wrong crowd, and he was very eager to find financing for a movie he believed in. And in that world, I guess you go to anybody you can figure it out has got some money to help you out with. But at some point, an alarm bell went off in his head. and at that point, she's going to kill Radin. And I think at one point Bob told me he felt lucky it wasn't him, but it was never going to be him. It would always have been Roy.
Yeah, no, yeah.
But he's a genuine American legend. I mean, there's no getting around him.
Okay, well then let me ask you this. Now you were invited to this home. I think it's called Woodland or something like that. This estate has a name.
The fancy name.
Yeah, you know. And you walk in there, okay? You know, and Robert Evans is also known for seducing women. It's one of the most beautiful women in the world, right? Do you think it's
I noticed the other day the list of spouses is like 10 or something.
Yeah. So he's a pretty impressive guy. He's charismatic. He has a lot of presence. You walk into this home, there's pictures on the wall, Henry Kissinger, Kirk Douglas, right?
I walked all through the house, and
Ted Kennedy.
He had an English butler.
Butler, he is a butler.
Yeah, it was pretty funny, but I don't know what condition he's in now. It's been a long time.
Okay, but Steve, my question for you is, do you think that possibly you were seduced by all that, and that somehow you're overlooking some of Evans' culpability in all of this?
No, I think the book, Ed, would have been a lot better and a bigger seller if I could have tied him into it.
Yeah.
But as a journalist looking to tell a truthful story, I went with what I had, and obviously nothing since then has disputed the findings in that book. So I think I got it right. I think the trial got it right. And at one point, I think Bob said something to me like, you know, why don't you not do this book and come out here and be a screenwriter or something?
Ah.
And I wasn't going to give it up, I can tell you that. But that book has held up. Your point is a very good one. Yeah. And I think it's something come out since the book that leaned in a very heavy direction against him. You'd have a good point. But nothing has come out that hasn't buttressed the findings of that investigation.
Gotcha. Now, and all this stuff with Berkowitz and the Process Church and all that stuff like that, have you looked into that thoroughly, or you just kind of dismissed it?
That came several years after Bad Company, and Bad Company had held me enthralled for a long time, and that was a really sordid story. I mean, the photographs in that one book that came out about it are horrendous, and it just didn't hold my interest.
What photographs?
There was a book about all those sort of devil-worshipping murders by a guy in New York. I forget the name.
Maury Terry?
Yes, that's what it was. And, I mean, if you look at that book, the photographs alone will just turn your stomach. But I just didn't see anything. I mean, if you're going to spend 3 or 4 years on a book, you really got to be interested in it. You really got to be transfixed almost by the story. It's got to carry you. And Bad Company carried me. I didn't see anything in the other book. And again, Maury may have really nailed it. He may be onto something really big. But for me, it was off the main trail that I wanted to be on.
Gotcha. But now, did you follow the case of Little Lisa Steinberg and Hedda Nussbaum?
I did not. What was that? Oh, Hedda Nussbaum. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
We covered that heavily here.
Okay. Now, wasn't there allegations that in Hedda Nussbaum's diary that she had taken Little Lisa to do child pornography films at Roy Radin's house?
I never heard the Roy Radin part. No.
But you heard the part about her doing a.
Oh yeah, that certainly was a part of it. But I don't know of any Roy Radin connection to that at all. So never heard that. Where did you hear that?
I've heard that in interviews with Maury Terry when I lived in New York on Bill Boggs and stuff like that in the afternoon back around that time. When that Lisa Steinberg case and Joel Steinberg.
That was an amazing case, wasn't it?
It really was, man. It was riveting, and I have the entire trial on videotape. I was just riveted by watching that trial on live on TV every day. It was just we need 10 books on that too, and 10 shows on that.
Yeah, there's so many good ones, but the thing is, if you're going to write a book that's 100,000 words, let's say, you really need a lot of gravity, a lot of material to carry that along. And for me, the magic is characters. I mean, I need to really have great characters in order to tell a great story. And Radin is a great character. Laney is an amazing character. And Evans is an amazing character. How you can fall that far after a career making those kind of movies and end up with those two, I'll never figure that one out. But I need great characters and a great story. It's like In Cold Blood. That was always the book I read that I said, God, if I could just find a case like this. I could write it in cold blood, and believe me, that book was on my mind as I was writing. And yeah, I could have given up that book and done something else, or maybe gone out there and sold my soul to the devil. But I was going to finish that book.
And if you notice too, the common thread through all of this was cocaine. You know, they were all addicted to coke. But it was Laney. Was Laney a coke user? Yeah, right.
Oh yeah. Oh, they were all heavy into it. They thought it was the coolest thing to do.
Yeah.
But for Larry, it meant he slipped into the point where he kind of was too weak to defend himself. Radin, it really sank him in. He became so paranoid, just totally paranoid. Jonathan wasn't. Jonathan was clear-headed. Jonathan, I don't know where he is now. At one point, I found him in an island off Spain, believe it or not. He was scared to death when he left Los Angeles himself. He really thought that Menser and Marty were going to come for him. And he kind of vanished for a long time. I didn't know where he was. But he didn't use drugs. He kept clear, and his mind was clear, and he knew the trouble Radin was in, and he warned him, and Radin was too whacked out to take heed to him.
Have you ever heard the allegations that of coke dealing between Mensker, because Mensker had his own coke dealing as well.
They were. I think Los Angeles and Miami. If you pick two cities between 1980 and 1986, where cocaine was abused in mountain form, it would be those two cities. And so many people, Ed, were making hundreds of millions of dollars in that business.
Oh, yeah, I remember,
caught. Literally never got caught. When I was working on the book, I interviewed a lawyer in Miami who defended all the big cocaine dealers because he knew Laney, and I wanted to talk to him about her. And he didn't want to be her lawyer because he was actually kind of scared of her. But he represented all the big dealers. And while I was in his office talking to him, interviewing him for this book, the phone rings, and it's a guy at the end with a heavy Spanish accent saying that he had a sailboat coming into Miami Harbor, and it hadn't arrived yet. Could this lawyer find out if it had been seized? And the lawyer said, "No, I can't find out if it's been seized. You're going to have to figure that out yourself. Call me if it's seized." The point is, these guys were making $20, $30, $40, $50 million a year and plowing it into condos, horse farms, auto dealerships. The untold story of America in the early 80s is how much drug money went into the economy.
Yeah, it seemed to have really influenced politics as well. You know, when you look at the Mena Airport in Arkansas and all the tons of cocaine that were coming through there, and careers were made, you might say.
Careers were definitely made.
You might say,
And I don't know how much Larry put away. I bet Larry could have had $30, $40, $50 million somewhere in the Caribbean. He hid it away really well, but the point is he hid it so well that no one, after his death, no one knew where it was, so his family couldn't benefit by it.
Yeah, well, I always got the impression that a lot of that money got stolen, like in Noriega, got his hand, was hiding out people's money in Panama and stuff like that, and then, just snatched it right out from under you once you were out of favor, because a lot of these banks ran on it too, it seems to be, and these offshore havens as well, Once you're dealing in that kind of money, who can you really trust?
Yeah, I think there are probably islands like the Grand Cayman chain that have literally $1 billion in one small bank.
Yeah, and if you go down to pick up your money, you get a traffic ticket, and then you never show up again. You're gone, I think a lot of that kind of stuff happens,
Yeah, I think that, as I said earlier, at one point in the 80s when there was a recession in most of America, there was a cash reserve in the Miami Federal Reserve System.
Oh yeah,
that much cash floating around.
No, I'm 53 years old. I'm very familiar with those 80s, man, the wild 80s with Miami Vice and stuff, and that was going on. There was I owned a nightclub in Manhattan around that time. So again with those Genovese guys, like you were mentioning before. Hey, by the way, who was his godfather in the Genovese family?
He's named in the book. I forget it now, Ed, but I tried to find out some stuff about him, and he was a mid-level Genovese guy. I found his name. I confirmed his name in the FBI records. And what struck me as incredible is how he ended up being kind of Roy Radin's protector for the business. So it meant, to my mind, it meant that Roy's business, his con artist business of these silly promotion tours, was actually a front for the Genovese family.
Really?
I don't know how else you'd have him in there. He must have been giving a piece of the action to this guy. And that he was low enough down the totem pole of the Genovese family that he never got busted. He died of old age, lived in some crappy apartment in Queens.
Yeah.
But why did Roy Radin need a guy in the Genovese family on his side? And there was an incident someone in Roy's family told me about where, and again, I never knew the name, but a well-off entertainer with a big name we would all know was going to work for Roy in Atlantic City on a show and backed out. And Roy had his Genovese guy not go after him physically, but to force him to come to the show, and he did.
Yeah, because there was also a lot of talk about how Radin, when he was doing this traveling road show for the Fraternal Order of Police, that if you didn't buy the tickets, he would send guys down there and convince you to buy the tickets.
Roy thought he could throw his weight around, but what he didn't understand is the more he got into drugs, the less effective he was.
Yeah, right.
And he turned everyone off around him. He just turned everyone off. And had he not been on drugs then, had he kept his feet under him, he could have won the struggle with Laney. Now, maybe not once the cocaine was stolen from the garage, but I think Roy could have, had he not been so paranoid from drugs, I think he could have beaten it and maybe done a deal, maybe made a movie. I don't know. I kind of think he turned everyone off who was around him.
Because he was a charming guy, and everyone did seem to love him. Even Tiny Tim, was a frequent guest up there,
Tiny Tim I must have interviewed Tiny Tim 20 times.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah, I knew Tiny Tim as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, Tiny loved Roy.
Yeah.
Tiny, when he couldn't find any work, Roy would put him on a stage in some little town in America that had no entertainment, where there was not even a movie theater, and people would pay $10, and it would be Georgie Jessel doing some silly routine, stuff you'd see on Ed Sullivan,
sure,
only probably worse. And he would have Tiny Tim playing the ukulele. And Tiny was broken up when Roy disappeared.
Yeah.
He was busted.
Well, I told the story the other night. I met Tiny Tim because he was at my friend's house at their wedding, for their wedding reception, performing there. Okay,
Yeah, and of course he got married on the Johnny Carson show.
Yeah, right. But now I always wondered, how did Tiny Tim get out there to Long Island from Manhattan?
A train.
Okay.
He took the train out, but I never met him face to face, but I talked to him on the phone a lot. And is he still alive even?
No, he's dead. He passed, yeah.
He passed away?
Yeah.
Incredibly odd man.
Yeah.
Incredibly odd man.
And it's so funny, too, how many people I've met in my life that knew Tiny Tim as well, and now I just met another one.
He seems to have crossed a lot of paths, but he could play the ukulele and sing a little song. I mean, it's kind of pathetic.
And that was it, yeah. But
that was literally it.
But we all know him.
But what Roy would do is he would call these guys up, and who hadn't been on Ed Sullivan, who hadn't been on Merv Griffin in years. He would call them up and he'd say, "Hey, I'm going to put together Vaudeville Revival, 1989. It's going to be in, Skokie, Illinois, and Pittsburgh, and Fargo, North Dakota. I'm going to have," and he would just reach out to people who hadn't had anything in years, but whose names were well known.
Right.
And then he would put them on a stage, and people would sit and fold up chairs and clap. They thought it was fantastic, and then he would keep the money.
Yeah, he would actually put them on a bus, and send them around. But the thing was,
it would have silly names like, Vaudeville 1979 or something, and they were grateful for the work.
But the indictment from the Attorney General in New York City was that he was having guys, he was threatening local shop owners to buy these tickets
for the police union.
Yeah, for the Fraternal Order of Police. Yeah,
kept it all.
Now,
that's a pretty silly con. If you're going to be a con man, you got to do better than that.
Yeah, but somehow he made millions enough to buy that house.
He bought that house for cash.
Yeah, right. That's why there had to be something else, man. There had to be coke or something.
I don't think he was dealing drugs, but anything's possible with that guy. Anything's possible, and it got him killed.
Yeah.
In the end, it killed him. No matter what happened out there, in the end, it killed him.
Oh. Yeah, I forgot. I was just about to ask you something else. We only got a couple of minutes left, man. What would you like to plug before we go?
I think it's just been great being on the show. It seems like you got a pretty successful show, Ed.
Yeah, the show's really taken off. Thank God for that, man. We're really we're doing the same thing Roy Radin did. You know, I look for these old stories, you know, and I bring them back, man. Everybody wants to hear about them. You know, we had James Brown last week, you know, and I go into the Jim Jones massacre in Jonestown, Guyana, stuff like that, and all kinds of.
Well, those are great stories to tell.
I'm trying to go for those iconic big stories, and this is definitely one of them. I plan on doing like another 10 shows on this topic, getting more into the process church and all that angle too as well, which I think is really I think there's a lot of validity to it.
You know, I think if you keep picking these kind of amazing stories that are out there that people were fascinated by at the time, I think you're going to be a hit. Thank you very much. I think so too, and I owe it all to guests like Steve Wick, the author of Bad Company, Drugs, Hollywood, and the Cotton Club Murder by Steve Wick. Go to my blog, The Opperman Report. Steve, I cannot thank you enough, okay? You're a legend, by the way, in this story. Your reference, Steve Wick, is referenced in every article, every show, everything. This book is referenced every time the name Roy Radin or the name Robert Evans comes up. You'll link to him forever, my friend. Not a bad group to relink to. But thank you, Ed, and best of luck. Thank you, sir. Good night. Bye-bye.